Hi there, and welcome to Fantasy for the Ages, a show where father and son sit down and talk about fantasy books. I'm the son in that equation, Zach.
And I'm the dad, Jim. Great to have you with us for a midweek special.
And this week's special will be, it'll be interesting. I'm excited for some discourse here.
Midweek specials exist because we love all sorts of fantasy genre and even thing that stretches out to sci-fi and sci-fi fantasy and horror, and we're going to get some zombie apocalypse in here one day.
Basically, if it's fantastical in nature and fiction, we're probably going to talk about it at some point, or at least reference it.
Right. We've designed our podcast so our primary focus is on a particular series at a time. And
right now, that's The Wheel of Time.
Which, just happens to be 15 books, so that will take us quite a while.
Just a little bit.
But we didn't want to miss out on all the other great things we could enjoy talking about, so we designed midweek specials. We don't do the same level of prep, typically for a midweek special. It's a little more spontaneous, because that way we have the ability to squeeze in extra episodes.
That being said, that means we also often are going to have our disagreements and arguments within ourselves and between each other a little more frequently in these midweek specials, and that's very apt for today's episode.
Now, if you're having an argument within yourself,
hey,
I think there's help for that. There's help for that.
It's healthy to take a look inside yourself and really analyze your inner being sometimes.
All right. Our topic today is something I've been looking forward to talking about since we started the podcast, the Dune Saga.
Oh, I thought you were interested about talking about your drink. Isn't that a thing we do?
I'm going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
But I wanted to make sure I'm just putting that out there. No, it's not Dune themed.
I don't know. It looks almost like a representation of spice.
My son is obsessed with drinks tonight. All right, I'll move on to it. You'll find this on our Instagram as usual. I've got a really pretty green drink. It's called a Perverted Leprechaun. I actually looked it up at St. Patrick's Day. We weren't recording on that day, but it's a delightful looking drink. It features blue curacao, Midori, Malibu rum, peach schnapps. Those are the alcohols.
Okay.
Then there's a little 7-Up, a little pineapple juice, and some sour mix.
Truthfully, not knowing what was in it, I just thought it might be applicable because it looks a little bit like what at least the old movie seemed to depict spice as.
I
bluish
always thought
in
that
color.
Is blue. This is more green.
Is it? Apparently my blues and my greens, it's a little funky. It's got
But
blue
we
curacao.
We can say melange. Sure, let's go there. What are you drinking, Zach?
Just a modified White Russian. I'm boring.
It's still not coffee.
No. I used whiskey instead.
Okay, he modified it. So before we jump into content, as usual, how are you today, Zach?
Oh, I'm doing, pretty great. It's midweek, so we've been working and stuff. It's not like I got to sleep in today. But all in all, I've been enjoying some rain. I actually quite like it. And while most people consider it kind of dreary, it really gets me in the mood for more reading and stuff. What about you?
I have had a pretty normal day as well. Again, full day of work. Then we had some dinner. And then we get to move on to hobby time and do a little podcasting. But I don't have anything real new to speak to today.
Fair enough. Speaking of podcasting, you said we were doing something with Dune. We've been talking about Dune, spice, all this stuff. What exactly are we doing?
Well, first I'm taking your picture, because there is something else new that he has. He's got new glasses.
Oh, yeah, I do.
So we'll show those off on Instagram. They look very nice.
I look a bit nerdier, but in a professorial way.
They don't look nerdy. They look
Let's be real.
fitting.
I look nerdy.
Well,
period.
But nerdy is cool. It's the new cool.
Oh, no, I own it.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
Fine. But it's still true.
All right. Dune. We're talking about the Dune saga today. And the focus here is I'm here as a fanboy. I'm going to talk about the saga as a whole, what I love about it, why I think it's one of the most, if not the best.
Hold on.
Most awesome.
Go back a step. You're going to admit right now already that you're maybe not saying it's the best?
No, I'm just being open to the fact that some might disagree. I do not want to diminish the perspectives of all of our fantastic listeners.
That's fair.
I can hold to, for myself, it being the greatest science fiction saga of all time.
Okay. Meanwhile, I'll be popping in, looking at his arguments, seeing what he has to say, and saying, Dad, you're wrong. Because I will fully admit that I think Dune is fantastic and wonderful, but I am going to raise some issues about it
This is what children do. They give you issues.
with your arguments as well, and then possibly even near the end present a counter argument, an example of something that is probably better than
Oh,
Dune.
bring it. All right. Don't forget that.
Oh, I
want to hear
won't.
it later.
I prepared
Okay.
a little bit.
So, the Dune Saga. In just an overview here, and this is going to be spoiler heavy, people. Now, I'm not going to,
It's only going to be so much spoiler heavy because I haven't read all of the Dune books.
I'm not going to go super, super deep, but I am going to give you a high level overview of what this saga is about so you can understand why it's so awesome, what's so epic about it. But let's get one thing straight right away.
Okay.
This is not hard science fiction. This
Okay.
is more the science fiction fantasy. Some might even say the space opera type. I won't go space opera on this. That's more Star Wars. This has a little more firmness in its science fiction, in the world building that's done.
Okay.
But still, some of the rules of science are played very fast and loose.
In that case, once you have given us a loose summary, I do have some questions of clarification to ask, but we'll stay put for the summary first.
Okay. And before I talk the summary specific, just the actual writings of this series.
Okay.
Frank Herbert is the original author of the Dune series.
Yes.
He wrote
For
six
six?
amazing books and intended to write one more to finish his saga, his vision. And unfortunately, he died. Feel bad. You were laughing now.
No, I'm laughing because you say intended to write one more, and there's been like 7 more or more.
You're stealing my thunder. Okay,
Isn't that what I'm supposed to do as a son?
not yet. Let me tell my story.
I outgrow your shadow, steal your thunder, all those
Sheesh.
things, right?
I can edit all this out.
You can if
the
you want.
power. Okay. He, just after the publication of the 6th book, passed away. So fans were left with a good story through 6 books, but with some definite cliffhangers, some hooks that were not carried through on, and just had to wait. His son, Brian Herbert, picked up the mantle after the passage of a number of years, and he partnered with Kevin J. Anderson. I don't know if you've read any of his. He wrote a number of the Star Wars novels back in the day.
Okay.
And those were
I knew
on
the name
my
was-
shelf once upon a time.
I recognized it, but I don't think I've read anything
I'm
by
going to guess
myself.
he's done other things too. I'm thinking, fans, you can shoot me out of the water on this later, but I'm thinking he's the one who wrote the Thrawn trilogy, which was probably the best of the Star Wars novels
Possibly.
that were out there.
I have a feeling that this name was dropped in a previous episode of ours, not by either of us, but rather during our fantasy draft. I think it was mentioned.
Okay. So Brian Herbert partners with Kevin J. Anderson, and we're going to write some more. But before writing that epic 7th book, he decided, I'm going to take some time to fill in a little more of the things we need to know about. So he
Okay.
goes back and writes 6 prequels.
Okay.
Takes it back thousands of years.
Something like 10,000
10,000
years.
I'm thinking it was 10,000 years. And we are being a little gray with some of our facts. This is not like we normally do on our Wheel of Time cover. Because, again, fanboy. I'm just talking generalities here. So, about 10,000 years in the past, and has 3 books that explain some critical background to how we end up where Dune is.
Okay.
And then jump ahead a few thousand years, and there's 3 more books
Okay.
that go from, okay, we had that earlier stuff, now we have this stuff, which will then set the stage for where Dune actually starts. And it fills in a lot of pieces, helps you understand why things are the way they are in the original saga. Then he writes number 7, finishes that, and then he goes on to write some more books.
So at that point, we were sitting at the original 6 prequel, then the 7th, and then eventually now sequels. Am I counting correctly?
Yeah, that's pretty much how it works.
Okay.
Here I've got up on a screen all the various books and short stories and things that have been written. There's lots of stuff out there now.
Yeah, that's a lot. And it's in like chronological order of the universe, not of publication.
Right.
And so
So-
seeing the publication dates was really interesting there.
So, summarizing here, I'm going to start with Dune and just these first 6 books, what happens here. At this time, there's a galactic empire. Not long time ago, far, far away. This is far, far away, but far in the future. This is set in our universe, okay? But in the distant future. And at this point, there's an emperor
Okay.
and there's a Landsrod, ruling houses that basically form a political body.
So you could argue that it's an imperial oligarchy of space.
Sure. The world of Dune is very feudal. Okay, it's set up as a feudal system. And each of these houses is like a feudal lord, and they control a planet. Some of them may control more than one planet, but that's their fief. Their fiefdom is their planet. Okay. There are a few other players in this universe that have something to do with things. One of them being the Space Guild, because this is not a universe where everybody owns their spaceships and flies all over the place. No, there is one group, the Spacing Guild, that controls intergalactic travel. You have to be able to get from planet to planet. Trade is essential in this universe. But to travel these vast distances at hyper light speed, you must work with the Spacing Guild. They have a monopoly on how you travel. They are the only ones who have the ability to travel.
So if you want to go planet to planet or have business between them, you have to go through Space Amazon.
Sure, they deliver. And here I introduce a unique thing in the Dune universe that we didn't understand entirely the reasoning for at first, and it gets rolled out over the course of the first few books. They do not use high-level computer technology. This is an intentional design of the people at this day and age, because in the distant past, something really bad had happened with technology, with intelligent technology, and therefore, when that was over, anything approaching artificial intelligence was outlawed. So they have technology.
They have very advanced technology.
But nothing that can process, nothing that can think.
Nothing smart.
Now, how do you compute intergalactic travel without that? Well, you have to have
drugs.
People who have somehow developed the ability to have those kind of computations. And yes, Zach, it takes drugs.
Apparently.
And specifically, it takes one drug. There's only one drug in the entire universe that the Spacing Guild has been able to utilize to give them the ability. And really what it is, it's the prescience to be able to look ahead. We're going from here to there and to be able to see the path we will need to travel so we don't hit a meteor, a comet, another planet, anything else. We can plot the perfect course and make that jump.
Help me out. Dictionary definition-ish of prescience?
Seeing into the future.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So they can foresee the right path to take when they're on their ship.
As I understand it, though, it's not necessarily a supernatural ability rather than, it is uber-natural, but it is computation and mathematic rather than, like, visions of the future, correct?
Yes, that's probably fair to say.
Okay.
So they can see all the possible paths that the ship could take, and they can figure out which ones will not end in disaster, and boom. And it's not a guess then.
No.
They can tell this is what will happen if we go this way.
It's enhanced brain power, not seance or magic.
Correct. There's nothing magical about this. You are right.
It just is a little bit mystical in that it's kind of impossible.
Now, with this same issue with no computing technologies, it has led mankind to find ways to enhance their own abilities. It would seem supernaturally, but no. What they have done is just taken their own mental capacities to levels we never knew in our time. So the Spacing Guild, not everyone who's in the Spacing Guild has this ability. There are particular people called navigators who no longer look like people. They're actually transformed, mutated through the process to gain this ability.
That's unfortunate.
And really now they can do one thing. They can fly ships. That's it.
Poor people.
But they are revered and cared for by the rest of the Spacing Guild people. It is the utmost thing to become one of the navigators. So you've got the navigators. You also have mentats. Mentats are basically human computers. They have so trained their brains that they can retain an unbelievable amount of knowledge. They can do calculations lightning fast. They can basically do everything a computer used to do, but they are human. There are other categories. I'm not going to go into all of them. Those are two key ones, but I'm also going to mention the Bene Gesserit.
Okay.
The Bene Gesserit is a pseudo-religious society of women, and they're kind of like nuns. The heads of them are called Reverend Mothers. It's a very religious-based thing, but it's not so much religion. Now, this one's great. Being most of you listening are probably Wheel of Time fans. These are like the Aes Sedai of this show. They don't know any magic, but they have special abilities. They have abilities with combat. They have mental acumen that's amazing. But what they're most known for is their political shenanigans, and then secretly, nobody knows this except them, their genetic manipulation of mankind.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that I was going to talk about eventually.
Well, and it's foundational to where this series starts. Many of the leaders around the Landsraad, these most powerful houses around the universe, have a Bene Gesserit with them. Oftentimes, the man is married to a Bene Gesserit who has been partnered with him because she brings special abilities and wisdom and insight to his rule.
Okay.
The Bene Gesserit, one of the things they've trained themselves is to have nearly complete control of their own bodies. And that even goes down to deciding, am I going to have a boy or am I going to have a girl when they have children? They can actually make it happen the way they want. It's just a mental control thing.
Like we said, this isn't going to be necessarily exactly accurate science fiction, but it's science fiction fantasy, and we're sticking with it.
Over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, the Bene Gesserit have been grooming and developing the gene pool to create an ultimate human that they're looking for. And I'd be going far too deep into the series to explain it all. But this person is the Kwisatz Haderach.
I wasn't going to try and say it.
Yeah. And it's someone they have foreseen will be the ultimate person to fulfill the destiny of mankind. And they are close. When the series starts, they are very close to finally having this person. And if memory's correct, 2 of the key houses are going to have children that when they couple together will produce the Kwisatz Haderach. That's what they believe. That's what they've shaped it up.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the 2 families that have to have children that will do that are mortal enemies of each other. House Atreides.
Wow, we've never seen a house war before.
House Atreides and House Harkonnen. And when this all starts, basically House Atreides is portrayed as the good guys. No one is perfectly good in this series, but they're portrayed as the good guys. House Harkonnen is the bad guys. And then there's the Emperor. His family is all about power and maintaining his hold on the universe.
Like a lot of Emperor figures in sci-fi.
And he has looked at House Atreides and sees them as a threat. They're way too popular and powerful. And the Harkonnens go into league with the Emperor's family and says, okay, let's do this thing to take care of House Atreides. And this is where the book starts. This is where the saga begins. Because what they have done is House Harkonnen, one of the things it controlled in the universe and why it is so filthy rich, is it controls the planet Arrakis, nicknamed Dune. Yes. And planet Arrakis is the sole location of the drug melange, or nicknamed spice, that again, the Spacing Guild must have in order for intergalactic travel to occur.
Basically, to make a galactic empire possible, you need this planet.
And as the book says, the spice must flow. Gotta keep going. It's an absolute necessity. And back in the time that Frank Herbert wrote this, it was a metaphor for oil. It's got to happen, and all the wars that have happened because of oil. And this, he was back in the 60s, he wrote this. So he was partly going there, but that's not super important to the understanding the rest of the book. Anyways, the Harkonnens, by the Emperor's order, have ceded Arrakis to the Atreides. It's a trap.
Yeah. I mean,
but there's no way in the political maneuverings of the government, there's no way that Duke Leto Atreides can turn down being given the most profitable and powerful property in the universe.
Even knowing it's a trap, it's one of those sorts of things of, well, you say no and you die, or you go and, well, you probably die anyways, but...
Yep. So they go. Teeny bit of extra understanding here. There's 3 of them that go in the family.
Okay.
There's Duke Leto, the lady Jessica, his wife, who is a Bene Gesserit, and their son Paul Atreides. Paul was never supposed to happen. Jessica was commanded by her superiors to have a girl who would then end up married with a boy Harkonnen and give us the Kwisatz Haderach. But because of her love for Leto, she gave him a boy. And she's in trouble. And that's not supposed to have happened, but it happens anyways. Partly because it happened, when they go then to Arrakis, the Bene Gesserits just write them off. You messed up. You didn't do what you were supposed to, so you guys are lost. She can not count on the Bene Gesserit Society to help. And sure enough, it is a trap. The whole thing goes south. The Harkonnens and the Emperor's special forces, disguised as Harkonnens, come in and wipe everything out. Except the Lady Jessica and Paul escape into the desert of Dune, the wasteland. This is a planet that's extremely arid, and there's no way to survive.
Technically speaking, I'm pretty sure the entire planet is sandy desert, except for things that have been changed about it or not discovered by the greater universe.
Yeah. Now, that's the deepest I'm going to go into detail on any of the books, because it sets things off.
Okay.
But
cool, because we don't have time to go that detailed on everything else.
Right. But what then happens is lots of adventures and shenanigans throughout it. Paul ends up becoming the Kwisatz Haderach. He turns into this. He develops special abilities, again, because of the genetic program that he is the product of, that he actually consumes a high degree of spice mixture, which is what the Reverend Mothers, the Bene Gesserit, do to get their special elite powers. He takes some of it, and it turns him into this uber-human. And one of the key things it does is it gives him enhanced prescience. There's that word again, where now he has visions. He can see what the destiny of mankind will be. And his decisions moving forward are driven by what he foresees. Mm-hmm. And much of the rest of the next 6 books, eventually 7 books, is driven by what can be foreseen. And what can be foreseen is that humanity is doomed, except for one path, which he comes to call the Golden Path.
There it is.
The Golden Path is the only route, the only decisions by which humanity will survive and eventually thrive. And it's the decision of, okay, do I, as Paul Atreides, do the things that will be terrible that I have to do in order for humanity to survive? Or do I not do them, take the easy route for myself, and doom all of humanity? There's no easy choice here. He has seen through his prescience that humanity is in for a mess, and billions of people are going to die. There's no way around that. But it's like, do billions and billions die, or do they all die? He decides the billions and billions route. This leads him to become emperor, to become more than human. He actually, at one point, becomes a sandworm. Now, we haven't talked about that. But on Dune, what creates spice, it turns out, are these worms, these sandworms, that become monstrously huge in size. And it's their excrement, basically. Their waste product is spice, which is collected and turned into this drug melange. He becomes one of these in order to become eternal, and he reigns the Empire as absolute ruler for 3,500 years. So, big swath of time that these books are moving through.
Long time.
Now, you would think one character ruling for 3,500 years leaves everyone else behind. But here's one of the things that makes the Dune saga so cool. They come up with a technology to create golas. A gola is basically their version of a clone. There's one of these societies out here in the universe that has this technology that they can create a perfect clone. And it has discovered a way to actually bring the clone's memories completely back so that it is truly the person again. New body, and you could get into metaphysics and spirituality.
It's basically I don't want to say stereotypical, because Dune is possibly one of the earliest ones to do this version of it, but immortality via rebirth as yourself.
One of the key characters, who was one of my favorite characters in the whole saga, is Duncan Idaho.
What a name.
I know. Duncan Idaho. Really? Cool. He's basically a warrior, a bodyguard, a brilliant tactician, and a favorite of Paul Atreides. So he keeps, every time Duncan Idaho dies, he gets another goal out and just keeps ordering, I need more Duncan Idahos. Just keep the Duncan Idahos coming. So all through his reign, there's always a Duncan Idaho with him.
Hey, every emperor needs a best friend.
At various points along the saga, Lady Jessica comes back as a gola. Duke Leto comes back as a gola. I mean, just about everybody important comes back as a gola. It's great.
What are you saying about the people who don't come back? They're not important?
Now, I said I was doing a really soft overview here, but I totally blended something that is really important, and there are people screaming at the podcast right now because I said this wrong.
Okay.
Because Paul Atreides does not become the God Emperor that lives and rules for 3,500 years.
No, isn't it his son?
It's his son.
Leto's second.
Right. Because Paul, seeing this golden path, actually refuses to go through with it. He can't. And instead, he wanders off into the desert alone, following a different vision he's seen. And his son takes over. And he does come back into the story in the next book as the prophet, a blind prophet who's out there and all. And then he dies. But it's his son, who also has these same powers now, but even to new levels, that follows the golden path. Lots of things that go on in here. Lots of politics and Bene Gesserit stuff, and then other forces, because during the God Emperor's reign, some of humanity scattered beyond the known universe. When the God Emperor finally dies, the diaspora, the scattering, return.
Okay.
And as they return, and this is part of what Duke Leto II had seen, the Emperor, he had seen this would happen. It was necessary for the scattering, so that when they came back, they brought new abilities, new things that had developed in mankind while they were apart. And they all come back in, but when they come back in, it brings in conflict and brings in other issues that have to be worked through. Lots of stuff happens, but what we get to as we reach near the conclusion, and eventually the end in the book 7, is during the scattering, they had gotten back in touch with a greater evil that was out there somewhere, and it's following them back. And this is the ultimate confrontation that was going to wipe out humanity if something hadn't been done to prepare them for it. And this saga prepares them for it. And this is why Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson wrote the prequels, to explain, okay, what is this? What's going on? So now just to jump back in history, mankind, and this starts even at Earth, where men were born from, because it's our universe, mankind had developed incredible technologies and artificial intelligence.
We're going back to supercomputer times still.
Yes.
Okay.
These are totally self-aware creatures, and some of them had risen up and taken over. At the start of the series, basically the robots, the AI is in charge, and mankind is slave to them. And then mankind revolts to get back control of its own destiny, overthrows the AI overlord, and is victorious, and makes rules and laws that we will never have technology like this again. Unfortunately, they didn't entirely wipe out the artificial intelligence. It basically does a last chance shoot for the stars. Figure a data burst sent out somewhere, hoping it'll still be able to land and do something.
And it got somewhere.
And it does. So the artificial intelligence recoups its abilities and stuff. And now, thousands of years later, the scattering, they come against each other again.
I don't think you've ever played this game series I'm about to mention, but it's very popular and, in my opinion, very good, and very good for its storytelling. And what I'm realizing now, partially because I didn't know the full extent, the ending-ish of Dune stuff, is that I feel like it got its origins loosely in Dune. So if anyone's out here listening, I really enjoyed the Mass Effect games.
Okay, gotcha.
And it has a very similar vibe to the ending of Dune here.
So bring it all back. In these prequels, we find out, and this is maybe a little hokey, but the Atreides family, the Harkonnen family, the family that goes on to be the Emperor, and their name is slipping my mind at the moment. They were key families way back at the time of the robot overlords.
Yeah, one designed the robot overlords, one shot the robot overlords.
No, they were actually... they were on different sides. The Atreides guy worked for the robots and thought the robots were the good guys. And the others were rebels. So in essence, Atreides was a bad guy. Harkonnen was a good guy. But Atreides comes around and the humans all side together. And then there's another chunk of books that talks about how the families kind of develop. I'm not going to give the final climax of the saga away.
Okay, that's fine. I don't think we need it.
But it all builds up to the grand conflict again for all time of mankind against the artificial intelligence. And how does it resolve? And he resolves it brilliantly, in my opinion. It's a great climax, and wow, okay, got it, cool.
That being said, we will have to an extent, omit the resolution from your justification of it being such a great series, because we're not going to spoil or talk about it too much.
Right, definitely. So why do I think this is one of the best series of all time? Well, he
Specifically
introduced...
sci-fi fantasy epics of all time.
Right. Herbert introduced so many different sorts of concepts and abilities, and to be able to think about and create a technologically advanced society that has rejected advanced computing, and to make that work, and then to come up with the idea of spice, and then all the things that happen because of spice, and Dune and the sandworms. One of the books is even called The Sandworms of Dune. I mean, they're a big part of it, but all the different ways that interweaves, and then all the different politics between the Spacing Guild and the Bene Gesserits and the Honored Maters, which I didn't even talk about, but they're in there. And
so the massive, complex, and in-depth world building he does.
Oh, it's amazing. It really is. But I think his shining achievement is the creation of the Golden Path. And to envision being a character who has been gifted with the ability to 100% accurately predict the future. If you've read Isaac Asimov's The Foundation series, there's a character who predicts the future using mathematical technology, but it's just a prediction. And the farther into the Foundation series, that there are decisions that are made because of his predictions. The farther we get in, the more life actually starts to stray from his predictions, because things don't always go the way predicted. To have a character who, Leto II, who figures out, okay, I can nurture and foster mankind down this golden path by turning myself into something that will live 3,500 years of rule, and to do that to himself, because he basically turned himself non-human. He sacrificed everything that he could have been and could have enjoyed for the sake of being a horrid despot of a ruler that nobody would ever truly value and appreciate for mankind. I mean, that's amazing.
Okay, so here I'm going to step in and do my first little, I guess, chipping into your argument. Okay. Not fully, but just a little thing. We did already say that the series is more loose in its science. So yes, that's acceptable. That being said, in truth, the idea that this character exists in a way that they can fully predict it straight out, as opposed to the Isaac Asimov version, which the predictions are more accurately mathematical predictions, and the further they get out, the more unknown variables, and it gets a little funkier. It's a little too far-fetched in times. Now, admitted to that, if you back off and say, okay, but he made himself live long enough that he can keep getting variables and keep predicting, that's great. Yeah. However, that means he was not able to predict it all the way straight through, and the thought of the character that you're trying to say that this Leo II really isn't quite accurate.
And yet, Leto II, when he dies, it's exactly the way he had foreseen he needed to eventually die, so that something else is able to happen that's absolutely necessary. So even down to how he dies at the end of 3,500 years is still following the golden path.
Okay. Do you have a next point?
No. Please poke more holes.
No.
I'm just, gonna speak to any holes you try to poke.
I'm getting to the point now where I want to go back. I said at the start of your summary that I wanted a clarification here. When you're trying to justify this as the best sci-fi fantasy epic, what does that mean? Both in three different terms, really. What does sci-fi, fantasy, or sci-fi fantasy, however you want to combine it, and then the term an epic? Because I think I personally need you to define what you're looking for a little bit so that I know what it is to say you're wrong about. Because I could say you're wrong if we're talking about it's the best series, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the best sci-fi fantasy epic. And there is some distinction.
Okay, sci-fi, because it has elements of science fiction in it.
Okay, has elements of science fiction. Got it.
Fantasy, because it goes well beyond what would truly be science fiction. It's adding in things that are just more fanciful than science-based.
Gotcha. Fantasy part, it goes beyond the science.
Epic, having to do with the scale and the scope of the struggle. It's thousands of years, all wrapping up in one final event. It all ties together, and it's truly epic. It's not just, some simple little story.
Really long time, all-encompassing universe stuff.
I mean, to be an
and-
epic doesn't have to be
But that's
really
what
long
you're
time.
looking for
But that's
and what makes a great
why
epic.
this one makes it an epic.
And that it has really massive stakes.
Yes, which it does. Absolutely.
Okay. That being said, I want you to keep those terms in mind that you did when we get to
trying
the
to paint
end
me
of
into
this.
a corner
No, when we get to the end of this episode. Because I was hoping that was kind of what you would say, and it makes me really happy about my counter pick.
All right.
But what is your next reason to support why you think this is the best sci-fi fantasy epic of all time? Because at the moment you've told me it's big, it has one really good character. That's all you've really told me about why it's so great.
I've told you 35 minutes of plot that's fascinating.
Sure,
gripping,
fascinating
and good.
plot, but what makes that plot any better than another plot?
Subjective taste definitely would be part of it. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay, so you enjoyed it. That
It
being
has.
said,
I mean, we
I
don't
don't
geek
think you're
out too
the
much on the technical side.
best
This is not the
enjoyment.
Inking Out Loud podcast.
That's
We don't
fine.
dive deep into the structure of the writing, although the writing is spectacular in this series.
I will dive a little bit into some of the story elements that I know and understand. First off, I feel like you did a bit of an injustice a little bit to the story by not
to.
mentioning one of the groups,
I had to, but which group do you want to throw in?
the Fremen.
Yeah.
Partially
I
because
left off the whole jihad part, yeah. Because you got on me for 35 minutes, dude.
it's okay. It is a
Do you want me to start a list of how many things I did leave out?
It's fine, but it's a
didn't
massive
even
story
mention Aaliyah.
element. And I did a little bit of research into Dune because I needed to. I have read the first book, but that's about all I did. It did not grip me in the same way it did you.
Got to get past the first
that
book
being
to
said,
really get gripped.
I do plan on going back and reading the rest of it. It is something that I think I will enjoy.
Now, you mentioned the Fremen.
Yes.
So let me give the Fremen just a little bit of love.
Please do.
We said the planet Arrakis is totally inhospitable. The Fremen are people who live on Arrakis. They have found a way to do it. One of it is by creating a still suit, something that conserves every single ounce of your body's moisture and recirculates it, cleans it, purifies it. So you're always drinking your own sweat, urine, and whatever, but it's pure water again. They have perfected such technology. And this suit also keeps all of your body moisture in, so you don't lose any. You breathe into the still suit. I mean, it's totally self-contained. But they also have huge caches of underground water hidden in places around the planet that nobody knows is there. And they have held on to it. But the Fremen are a very insulated society who worship the sandworms and come to follow Paul and then later his son Leto and follow them with religious fervor. And this is part of the golden path that's seen. They are such an amazing and unique people that once they learn the special fighting abilities of the Bene Gesserit, because Paul and Jessica teach it to the Fremen, they become an unstoppable force. And Paul realizes, okay, they have come to worship me and are ready to fight for me, which they do to help win back Dune, but they don't want to stop there, and he can't stop them. There's no way. He's seen the future. He cannot stop them. He can only channel them, focus them. So if he doesn't try to focus them, they're going to end up being the destruction of billions and billions of people. If he focuses them and uses them, they're going to be the destruction of billions and billions of people, but with a better end
benefit
in sight. So he chooses that bad choice. Although he can't stick with it, he walks away from it, and his son, Leto II, picks up the mantle and still does that with the Fremen. So they're amazing, but yeah, sorry, I left it out. There's 3 minutes.
So as we now are talking about this group and the general narrative that part of it follows, I came across something in my reading that is a common discussion with Dune, whether it's the books to eventually film adaptations, and there's a new one coming out, so the conversation is coming back up more, and that's whether or not Dune falls into, whether you want to say a trap or a trope is a little bit semantic, but of a white savior narrative. This loosely is characterized into the Fremen and the fact that Frank Herbert based them largely off of a number of different people of color groups. And, well, who brings them into the, oh, you need one person to come in and tell you how to really do things, and now you can succeed and take over and whatever. Well, it's a white guy who's the result of a eugenics experiment.
Perhaps.
Now,
but it's the plot device that was used.
that being said, the conversation on that could take us a whole long time as to whether it is or not. It has its merits to have issue with it for that, but it also has reasons why it potentially is not. And your purpose of saying that there's still horrible things being done for the sake of this golden path and goodness kind of goes to show that maybe it isn't.
And let me touch on the white savior complex a little bit too here. Very different from what you typically would define that way, because Paul and Jessica flee into the wilderness. They are saved by the Fremen. They did not come to free or empower or save the Fremen. No, they are saved by the Fremen. And then the Fremen have their own prophecies that Paul, they believe, is the fulfillment of.
Whether he is or exploits that is up for debate.
In the end, he is not the one that even continues down the path with them.
No.
He marries a Fremen. Now, technically, she's his concubine in the future, because for political reasons, he marries the daughter of the actual emperor.
Great.
But he doesn't ever consummate with her. Chani, his concubine, is truly his wife. And Leto II is their child. So the one who becomes God Emperor is half Fremen.
To me, this raises some possible overplayed issues in that it's very much a way that is maybe new or inventive and playing on things that we know in a different way. But at the same time, I see a bunch of elements in Dune that we've talked about either done before or done after, possibly better. Dune does it in its own way, but it's not necessarily the end-all be-all best. And that's kind of where I'm sitting on this right now.
Oh, man. You know, you also, I believe, need to take into context when Dune was written and what else was it there? What else was there before it, of its scope, of its approach, of the way it took things? There wasn't anything.
But does that make it the best? Is it the best just because it's old? I'd say no. Take, for example, and I am going to get crucified for what I'm about to say. But, that being said, I know our audience enough to think I won't get crucified too terribly. Take Tolkien.
Take him where?
Down a trip of memory lane as we look at the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, the Return of the King, his trilogy even, not just the full thing, but just the trilogy. We're going to start with that. It's foundational for so much fantasy. But I'm not going to sit here and say it's the best fantasy series of all time either. Personally, so far that I've read, I've enjoyed The Wheel of Time more. And I want to say it's better. But it also needed the foundational thing. So I give Tolkien his credit, but I don't say that it's the best fantasy series.
Okay, I feel like I want to poke and push you to get to the end, because you have something you want to put forward you think is better.
Better than Dune?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I struggle to come up with something that is better in the way I look at epic sci-fi
I will tell
fantasy.
you this. You've read more of it than I have. I have barely read any of it. And I still think if you agree with me that it fits your criteria, will admit that it is better than Dune. Ready?
Sure.
Brandon Sanderson's The Cosmere.
No, that's not
It
sci-fi fantasy.
Is it?
That's
Are
just
you sure?
fantasy.
Are you sure?
Yes,
Because
I know
there
there's
are-
the Cosmere.
There are a bunch of elements in it that fit the qualities that you said of sci-fi.
It is fantasy.
Hold on. It has basis
No.
in science and strict regulations at times. We have the concept of planets and different galaxies and various universal things, these elements that make it science or futuristic at times in different books. And while it's not always obvious, they're written in ways where it's a fantasy book. It's got very scientific-y vibes in some of them.
Okay, I just have to intervene with one major exception here.
Okay.
The Cosmere is at its root magic-based. So powerfully magic-based.
You never said sci-fi fantasy couldn't be.
But Dune has nothing to do with magic, and we emphasize that again and again at the beginning, and that is a distinct difference between fantasy and sci-fi fantasy.
And yet, by your definition, what makes it sci-fi fantasy is when we leave the science far enough to be fantastical.
Yes, but the science is still there. The elements are still there, and they're not there in the Cosmere. I have, as you said, I've read more of the Cosmere than you have. There's nothing I've come across yet that comes anywhere close to replicating something that makes me feel like science fiction.
I propose a challenge to your view of, I guess, magic. And that's that time and time again in history, we say magic is science we don't understand yet. And if you look at much of the works of Sanderson, he explains his magic systems very well, almost to a methodical
You're an idiot.
system.
And I'm only saying that because
science.
Sanderson, he's not listening to us. But if
could
he
totally-
was, he'd probably be going, yeah, listen to your boy. He's got a point.
Sanderson, step in here and talk about your
Because, yes, he has very well-defined
magic
magic systems.
and soft
they are
magic.
hard magic. So they are
and
hard
that leads
magic.
it to a sense where it's almost
scientific. But I reject your reality and substitute my own.
Isn't that what fiction's about?
Dune is so different in feel. Okay, so I didn't talk about feel, but it has a much different feel from the Cosmere.
We never said
Cosmere
that-
feels like fantasy.
And-
Dune feels like science fiction fantasy.
And yet, Dune is widely not fully accepted by the hardcore science fiction fans. It's something that is seen as too fantasy.
Did you do a poll of that?
I did research. That's about all I did. I read
I'd like
on
you to
the
quote your
internet a
sources
lot.
here. Oh.
Tor.com.
That was on Tor.com? Really?
There was an article.
Was it a Drew McCaffrey article?
I don't think so. I did look, but no. It was one that was partially talking about the pros and cons and discussion around Dune.
He did prepare.
I read.
That's where you came up with that white savior line, too,
Yes,
didn't you?
exactly.
Yeah.
Most of my preparing was I went, Tor.com is probably a fairly valid resource on this topic.
Now, he has put forward as his major counterpoint that the Cosmere is a better sci-fi fantasy. Most of you out there who
Sci-fi fantasy epic,
love
specifically.
the Cosmere would agree with me, I think, that no, it's not sci-fi fantasy.
Here is where I propose.
It's epic fantasy. It's not sci-fi fantasy.
What I propose is that each individual series or novel or whatever of the Cosmere fits more often into fantasy style thing and its own great thing. But when you take the bits and pieces that connect it all, and we haven't seen exactly where it will go
Well,
or
we don't know where
end,
Sanderson's taken it yet.
but I'd say partially depending on how he wraps
He
it
may
up.
get all the way until just before the last book and die.
And have to get someone else to step in for the last book and it becomes
It's
3 more
becoming
books.
a trope. He'll have George R.R. Martin write it.
No, because then it will never get finished. Anyways,
He could throw in at the end, and this is all connected by spice.
I like to say and think that the ways in which they are connected and it becomes the Cosmere rather than just individual series is part of what makes it so much more sci-fi fantasy.
But what we've already seen, and again, I've read more than you have of it.
You don't have to flex that. We're
We've
good.
seen some of these connections happening, and they're not science-y. They're still... They're having to do with magical things, magical understandings of the cognitive realm, the physical realm, the spiritual realm. They're not science.
I think I would argue from, and I guess you can say you've read more.
Oh, have I mentioned that?
My understanding is that it's not magic-y, but rather power. And that power you can define as magic-y, or you can say things like we call science stuff like the power of the Big Bang that spontaneously makes things or whatever. Those are things that truthfully sound more like magic than they do science, and yet we call it science. So
It is a premise.
cosmic power does not necessarily mean magic. I think it's more shifted towards science, and anything you bring into multiple worlds, planets, travel, stuff like that, I think bridges the gap to science.
Now, forget about the categories. Just comparing what I know of the Dune saga to what I know of the Cosmere.
The Cosmere's better.
Nope, not yet. Maybe it will become that, but not yet. And because part of what makes the Dune saga better for me is where it gets to. I know where it gets to.
However, we said we cannot, for this, use the ending as justification
Oh, shut up.
because
No.
we're not explaining it.
No. I know it, though, so I can stake my reasoning on it, even though I
I'm just
can't
saying,
share it with
it's in the recording
listeners out in the
unless he
internet
edited
land.
it out because he wants to make himself sound better.
Beep.
He admitted to all of my various rules and definitions. He walked into this, and before we started a couple days ago, he told me, "You did debate in high school. We can have this discussion." And
I judged debate.
my
and I'm
brain-
gonna deem you as
Nah.
fallacy.
My brain immediately went into, it doesn't matter whether or not I know exactly what I personally am talking about, but rather if you choose to use specific definitions
Which is why you were pushing so hard.
And if you choose
I still say
to admit
things
things,
right on the definitions I gave.
we finally get down to my point. And if you want to say arbitrarily that you personally enjoy Dune better than the Cosmere, that's fine. You're allowed to say that. I'm not going to admit that it is a better sci-fi fantasy epic.
Now, I'm not entirely able to say I enjoyed the Dune saga better than I'm enjoying the Cosmere, because I enjoy them for different things and in different ways. But as a complete epic, at this point, yes, I find Dune more satisfying because I don't know where the Cosmere is going yet. And there's still pieces that are out, just a few, that I haven't read yet. I've read almost all of what's out there, but I'm almost done. Dune, I got the saga. There's a few extra things that have come out in recent years that are just add-on stuff that I haven't read. But I got the completion of the series.
I think completion can make something more fulfilling, potentially, but it doesn't in and of itself make it better.
Now, Brandon Sanderson, in many of his books, has had a whoa finish to things, which is very impressive.
So if he's going to have that for the entirety of the Cosmere?
If he does something like that to finish off the whole Cosmere, that could be game-changing. That could be impressive. But got some work to do before I'd go that far and say, it's way better than the Dune saga.
In like 20 years, when the final book of the Cosmere is out, we will revisit this topic, and he will eat his words. And in the meantime, if you agree with him, don't let me know. But if you agree with me, no, I'm kidding. Let us know either way.
We might put a Twitter poll out here. Who was right? Jim or Zach, and see how many Twitter accounts do I have? I might have to create some more just to help with the vote.
I'm not okay with you boosting your numbers that way.
You'll never know.
I don't know. Half of those I have access to too. So,
all right. I think we've had enough fun with this topic for today. We got to dig into Dune. Get that? Dig into Dune.
Because it's sand.
Yeah, that was nice. Spicy, huh?
Digging holes in sand isn't very effective.
I hope you enjoyed diving in with us a little bit too, getting a taste for what's all there. If you've never read the Dune series, and despite all my spoiler warnings, listen to all this anyways, I hope you'll still go back and read it, because trust me, I did not ruin everything. And of course I didn't tell you the ending, but there is so much depth to it that I really glossed over at a very high level. I did it a deep disservice if that's all you've ever heard and will ever hear about the Dune saga.
Like I said, I did a little bit of research, but I've only actually read the first book, and it was years ago. I myself will go back and read it, and there's a very minor chance that I will change my tune on this when I do, but more likely, I think I'll enjoy it, but still refuse to admit that it's as good as my dad says.
And we shall see. But that's where we'll leave you then for now, the end of our midweek special. Tune in next time as we move back to the Wheel of Time.
Starting with Book 2.
The Great Hunt. Definitely going to be something that we'll have a lot of fun with. Do some searching, apparently. Hunting. Something like that.
What are we looking for?
Something great.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that'll be out on the next Sunday, or just right there, the next episode in your feed, if you just keep going, if you're one of those people. We love those of you who found us later and are just following along. If you are with us right now, or if you are later on, and I'm sure we're still around, we'd love for you to interact with us.
Well, that got morbid for a moment.
There are many ways you can get in touch with us. We do have plain old Gmail, fantasyfortheages@gmail.com. Go ahead, send us an email. Tell us what you're thinking.
Or you can get a little crazy with it and hit us up through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Yeah, I'll admit, Twitter is my go-to there these days, which, if you knew me a year ago, you'd be laughing about, but I'm loving Twitter nowadays. And Facebook, kind of sporadic, but if you put something there, we'll see it.
And if you want to see any of the drink recipes, they'll be on Instagram.
Instagram's your place, your jam. But the best way to interact with us is to join our Discord server.
Absolutely.
An invite code to get on our server is included in the show notes, as was all the ways to find us on social media if you don't want to just do a great hunt to find us yourself.
He's here for the dad jokes, ladies and gentlemen.
One other way you can interact with us and support us is to become a patron on our Patreon page. We have some special extra benefits for people who are patrons. One of the things we'll be rolling out soon is actually the first of our special patron-only content. And we'll be adding things periodically to that. So those who are patrons, you get access to those. Depending on the level you join, you can also have early access to all of our recordings. As soon as they're ready, you don't have to wait till they publish. You can also be with us live during our recordings. We love interacting with our fans when
Absolutely.
they're here with us on the Discord server. And if you really have more money than you know what to do with, you can support us at a high enough level to be a guest on the podcast with us. And you, right here, can tell me how wrong I am.
Or me, but hopefully him, because please.
But enough of our self-promoting. We do this for the fun of it. If any of you feel like helping us out and supporting us on Patreon, that's just icing on top for us. We appreciate it. We don't make any money off of this, and we're not looking to, but we wouldn't mind offsetting our our hosting fees and the cost of our equipment. That'd be awesome.
That being said, we're still going to keep doing this either way.
You bet. All right, that's all we have tonight.
Absolutely.
So I guess we will talk to you next time.